Taeyang Park stood in the recreation area, surrounded by darkness and the sound of frightened creatures. The power had gone out 3 minutes ago, and those 3 minutes felt like an hour. Around him, small bodies pressed close, making high-pitched, chittering sounds that hurt his ears. He had been walking past the recreation area when the lights died. The emergency systems should have kicked in immediately, but they hadn't. Through the darkness, he heard the terrified sounds and pushed through the door to help. Now he was stuck here, with what he guessed were 5 or 6 alien children, all of them scared out of their minds. Taeyang pulled out his personal light device, keeping it on the lowest setting so he wouldn't startle anyone. The soft glow revealed 3 large, furry faces, staring up at him with enormous eyes. They looked like bear cubs, if bears had patches of fur that shimmered blue and green in the light. Their mouths were open, showing small teeth, and they were breathing fast. Rilthi cubs. He recognized them from the station briefings. The Rilthi were one of the more important species in the Galactic Coalition, and these cubs probably belonged to diplomatic families, which meant he really needed to keep them calm and safe. "Hey, it's okay," Taeyang said softly. "The lights will come back soon." The cubs didn't stop chittering. If anything, they got louder. One of them grabbed onto his leg with surprisingly strong paws. Another was backing into a corner, its fur standing on end. Taeyang had no training for this. He was a cultural attaché, which meant he handled paperwork and attended boring meetings. He didn't know anything about alien children or how to calm them down. His mind raced, trying to remember if the briefing had mentioned anything useful. Were Rilthi scared of the dark? Did they have some special need he didn't know about? The chittering grew more desperate. Taeyang sat down on the floor, and immediately all 3 cubs pressed against him. They were warm and trembling. One of them made a sound almost like crying. Without thinking about it, Taeyang started talking. "Did I ever tell you about the tiger and the thief?" he asked, keeping his voice low and steady. "This is a story my grandmother told me when I was little." The chittering didn't stop, but it got a little quieter. Encouraged, Taeyang continued. "Long ago, in a small village, there lived a baby who cried every night. The baby cried so loud that the whole village could hear it. The mother tried everything. She sang songs. She rocked the baby. She offered milk. Nothing worked. The baby kept crying and crying." One of the cubs shifted slightly, its large eyes fixed on Taeyang's face. He kept going. "One night, a tiger was walking near the village. The tiger was big and strong and very hungry. It heard the baby crying and thought, 'That sounds like an easy meal.' So, the tiger crept closer to the house. But then, the mother said something that made the tiger stop. She said, 'If you don't stop crying, the tiger will get you.' But the baby kept crying. The tiger was confused. The baby wasn't scared of tigers at all. The second cub had stopped backing away. It was listening now, its head tilted to one side. The chittering had faded to occasional small sounds. Then the mother tried something else. She said, 'Stop crying, or the dried persimmon will get you.' And suddenly, the baby stopped crying. Just like that. Complete silence. Now the tiger was really confused. What was a dried persimmon? The baby wasn't scared of a tiger, the most dangerous animal in the forest. But it was terrified? Of a dried persimmon? The tiger thought. This dried persimmon must be the most fearsome thing in the world. I should leave before it finds me. Cry. The third cub made a sound that might have been a laugh. Taeyang smiled and continued. At that exact moment, a thief was climbing onto the roof of the house. The thief wanted to steal the cow from the yard, but it was dark, and the thief slipped. He fell right onto the back of the tiger, who was hiding in the shadows. The tiger felt something land on its back and thought, "Oh, no! The dried persimmon has got me." The tiger was so scared that it started running as fast as it could through the forest. Now all three cubs were quiet, watching him with intense focus. Their eyes reflected the small light, making them look even bigger. The thief was holding onto the tiger's fur, screaming, "Help! Help! A tiger!" But the tiger just heard noise and ran faster, thinking, "The dried persimmon is even more terrible than I imagined." The tiger ran and ran until it reached the deepest part of the forest. Finally, the thief fell off and ran away. The tiger hid in a cave, shaking with fear. And from that day on, the tiger never went near that village again, just in case the dried persimmon was still there. One of the cubs made a sound that was definitely a laugh. The others joined in, their chittering now sounding happy instead of scared. They pressed closer to Taeyang, but not because they were afraid anymore. They seemed comfortable now, almost relaxed. "What is persimmon?" one of them asked. Its voice was high and squeaky, and Taeyang was startled to realize it was speaking his language. "It's a fruit," Taeyang explained. "A dried fruit. It's sweet and chewy. Definitely not scary at all." This made the cubs laugh harder. "Tiger's scared of fruit," one said. "The tiger didn't know that," Taeyang said, smiling. "Sometimes we're afraid of things we don't understand." The lights flickered once, twice, then came back on fully. Taeyang blinked in the sudden brightness. The cubs looked up at him, their fur now clearly visible in shades of cream and brown, with those strange, beautiful patches of shimmering color. "More story," one of the cubs demanded. "The lights are back now," Taeyang said gently. "Your parents are probably worried about you." "One more story," another cub insisted. "Please." Before Taeyang could answer, the door opened and several adult Rilthi rushed in. They were much larger than the cubs, easily twice Taeyang's height, with the same shimmering fur patches. One of them made a deep rumbling sound that might have been relief or concern. The cubs ran to the adults, chattering excitedly. But they kept looking back at Taeyang, pointing at him with their paws. One of the adult Rilthi approached Taeyang slowly. She was wearing formal diplomatic robes and moved with obvious authority. "You are the human," she said. Her voice was deep and resonant. "I am Ambassador Cathella. These are my nephew's cubs." I'm Taeyang Park," he said, standing up quickly and trying to look professional. "I just happened to be here when the power went out. The cubs were scared, so I tried to help." "They are never silent during darkness," Ambassador Cathella said, studying him carefully. "We usually must give them medical sedation during power failures. Their fear response is very strong." "What did you do?" I just talked to them," Taeyang said, feeling awkward. "Told them a story. It's something humans do with children sometimes." "A story?" The ambassador repeated slowly, as if testing the word. "You created images in their minds with only words?" "Well, yes, I suppose so." The ambassador looked at the cubs, who were tugging at her robes and chattering rapidly. She listened to them for a moment, then turned back to Taeyang. "They say you made them see a tiger, and a thief, and a fruit. But there was no hologram, no projection device." "That's right, just words." They imagined the rest themselves. Ambassador Cathella was quiet for a long moment. "This is very unusual," she finally said. "Rilthi cubs do not have strong imagination until they are much older, yet they describe seeing your story very clearly." She bowed her head slightly. "You have done a great service, Taeyang Park. I am in your debt." "It was nothing really," Taeyang said, embarrassed. "Just a story my grandmother used to tell." As the ambassador led the cubs away, they kept turning back to look at Taeyang. One of them called out, "Come back! Tell more stories!" Taeyang waved and watched them leave. He didn't think much of it at the time. It was just a strange experience during a power outage, a small moment of connection with some scared kids. He had no idea that this small moment would change everything. 3 days after the power outage, Taeyang noticed he was being followed. Not obviously, and not by anyone threatening. But every time he walked through the station corridors, He saw small faces peeking around corners. Cubs, younglings, children from at least 4 different species, all watching him from a distance. It was strange enough that he mentioned it to Hana Yun during lunch. Hana was one of the only other humans on the station, a linguist who spent most of her time analyzing alien languages. She had become his closest friend in the 6 months since he arrived. "They're probably just curious," Hana said, eating her noodles. "You're still relatively new here. Humans are interesting to them. They're not watching you," Taeyang pointed out. "That's because I don't calm terrified Rilthi cubs with magic words," Hana said, grinning. "I heard about that, by the way. The entire diplomatic section is talking about it. Apparently, Ambassador Cathella told everyone that you have some kind of special human ability." Taeyang groaned. "I just told them a story. It's not special." But the following day, something happened that made him reconsider. He was leaving his quarters when he found a small group waiting in the hallway. 3 Rilthi cubs, 2 bird-like creatures he recognized as Kess, and something that looked like a walking fish in an environmental suit. The Rilthi cubs from the power outage were there, in the front. The one he later learned was named Vra, spoke first. "Will you do the thing again?" she asked. "The words that make pictures? You mean tell a story?" Taeyang asked. All of them made sounds of agreement, different for each species but somehow all meaning the same thing. "Yes. Please. Now. I have to go to work," Taeyang said apologetically. Their disappointment was so obvious that he felt guilty. "Maybe later?" he offered, and they brightened immediately. That evening, he found twice as many younglings waiting outside his quarters, and 3 adult aliens trying to politely get his attention. A Rilthi father approached him nervously. "My daughter has not stopped talking about your story-making. She wants to know what happens next to the tiger." "Is there more to this tale?" A Kess mother clicked her beak anxiously. "My sons say you can make them see things that aren't there. This is very unusual. Could you perhaps do this for them once more? They have been very restless." The walking fish spoke through a translator device. "The young one of my family group has expressed strong desire to experience human narrative process. We would be honored if you would share your gift." Taeyang stood in the hallway, surrounded by hopeful alien children and their parents, and realized he had somehow created a situation without meaning to. He wanted to say no, but looking at all those expectant faces made it impossible. The next morning, he went to Commander Do-hyun Choi's office. The commander was the highest-ranking human on the station, a former military officer who now handled security and logistics. He was a serious man who didn't smile much, but he was fair. "I have a strange problem," Taeyang began, and explained the situation. Commander Choi listened without interrupting, his expression neutral. When Taeyang finished, the commander was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "And you want to tell these children stories officially? As part of your duties?" "I don't know," Taeyang admitted. "I just don't want to disappoint them. But I also can't have dozens of younglings showing up at my quarters every evening. It's becoming disruptive. Have you spoken to Ambassador Cathella about this?" "Not yet. I wasn't sure if it was appropriate." Commander Choi nodded slowly. "I'll authorize 1 weekly story session in the community center. 1 hour. You can invite up to 20 younglings. If it causes problems, we'll stop immediately." "Agreed?" "Agreed," Taeyang said, relieved. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," the commander said. "If this goes badly, it's your responsibility." The announcement went out through the station's family network. Taeyang would hold a story hour in the community center on Saturday evening. 20 spots available. First come, first served. Hana thought it was hilarious. "You're going to be the station's official storyteller," she teased. "Should I start calling you Master Taeyang?" "Please don't," he said. Saturday came. Taeyang arrived at the community center 30 minutes early to set up. He didn't need much. Just a comfortable place to sit and maybe some cushions for the younglings. He had decided to tell another traditional story, one about the sun and moon. When he opened the doors at the scheduled time, his careful plans disappeared. There weren't 20 younglings waiting. There were at least 60, representing more species than he could count. They filled the community center, sitting on the floor, perching on furniture, floating in cases where the species could float. Parents stood along the walls, watching with interest. Taeyang froze. This was too many. Way too many. He wasn't prepared for this. Hana appeared at his elbow. "Breathe," she whispered. "You've got this. Just tell them a story, like you did before." Taeyang took a deep breath and walked to the front of the room. The younglings all turned to look at him, and the room fell silent. "Hello," he said, his voice only shaking a little. "I'm going to tell you a story about how the sun and moon came to be in the sky." He began the tale, speaking slowly and clearly. As he talked, he watched the younglings' reactions. The Rilthy cubs leaned forward, their eyes wide. The Kess younglings' feathers ruffled with excitement. The Brel, the fish-like species, changed colors in patterns he didn't understand but somehow knew meant they were engaged. The story was about a mother and her 2 children who were chased by a tiger. They climbed a tree to escape, praying for help. A rope came down from the sky, and they climbed up to heaven. The tiger tried to follow, but its rope broke, and it fell. The mother became the sun, and her children became the moon, taking turns to light the sky so they could always watch over the world. As Taeyang told the story, he found himself changing small details based on what he saw. When the Kess younglings seemed especially interested in the climbing part, he added more description about how the children climbed. When the Rilthy cubs looked sad about the mother being separated from her children, he emphasized how they could still see each other every day. When he finished, the room stayed silent for a moment. Then, all the younglings started making noise at once, a cacophony of different sounds that somehow all meant the same thing. They loved it. The questions came immediately. Why did tiger chase them? How high was tree? Can you climb to heaven from any tree? What happened to tiger? What happened to tiger? Do sun and moon get lonely? Taeyang tried to answer them all. But there were too many. The younglings pressed closer, each one wanting his attention. Some of the parents stepped in, gently pulling their children back. After everyone had left, Taeyang sat down heavily on one of the cushions. Hana sat beside him. "That was amazing," she said. "Did you see how they reacted? I've never seen younglings from different species all engaged in the same thing before." "There were too many," Taeyang said. "I told Commander Choi, 20 at most." "Word got around," Hana said. "Can you blame them? You're offering something none of them have experienced before." That night, Taeyang lay in his bunk, thinking about the evening. The younglings' faces kept coming back to him, the way they had listened so intently, the questions they had asked, the joy in their voices. He fell asleep and dreamed about a room full of children from 100 different worlds, all of them asking him to tell them just one more story. On Monday morning, Commander Choi called him to his office again. Taeyang prepared himself for a reprimand about the crowd size. Instead, the commander said, "I received 14 formal requests from diplomatic families. They want you to continue the story sessions. Ambassador Cathella has also sent a personal message supporting the program." He paused. "I'm authorizing daily sessions if you're willing. 1 hour each evening." Taeyang stared at him. "Daily?" The station psychologist reviewed recordings from Saturday's session. "She says the younglings are showing unusual cognitive activity, high engagement, creative thinking, emotional processing. She wants to study it further." Commander Choi's expression softened slightly. "You've started something interesting, Park. Let's see where it goes." Contacted. As Taeyang left the office, he passed a group of Rilthy cubs in the hallway. Vra saw him and immediately ran over. "Tonight?" she asked hopefully. "More stories tonight?" "Yes," Taeyang said. "Tonight." She made a happy chirping sound and ran back to her friends. They all looked at him and waved their paws excitedly. Taeyang waved back, wondering what exactly he had gotten himself into. 2 months later, Taeyang's life had become something he never could have imagined. Every evening at 7, he sat in the community center and told stories. The room was always full. The younglings had started bringing their own cushions and claiming favorite spots. Some of them arrived an hour early just to get the best seats. But the evening sessions weren't enough anymore. Younglings started showing up at his office during the day. They waited outside meeting rooms. 3 times he found cubs sitting outside his quarters when he woke up in the morning. Their parents apologized but also hinted that maybe, possibly, if he had just a few spare minutes. The stories themselves had evolved too. The younglings weren't satisfied with short folktales anymore. They wanted longer stories. They wanted to know what happened next. They wanted stories that continued over multiple days. Hana suggested he start reading from books instead of just telling traditional tales. Humans have thousands of years of written stories, she said. Use them. So Taeyang started bringing human novels to the story sessions. He chose carefully, looking for books that might appeal to different species. Adventure stories for the Rilthi cubs, who loved brave heroes. Mystery stories for the Kes younglings who enjoyed puzzles. Even romance stories for the Brel, who seemed fascinated by emotional connections. The first time he read a chapter from an adventure novel and stopped at an exciting moment, the younglings nearly rioted. What happens next? They demanded. You can't stop there. That's all for tonight, Taeyang said. We'll continue tomorrow. The wait until tomorrow became almost unbearable for them. They talked about the stories constantly, according to their parents. They made guesses about what would happen next. They argued about character motivations. Some of them even started creating their own endings, just in case. 3 weeks into the chapter readings, a new human arrived at the station. Dr. Mireille Song was a xenopsychologist, someone who studied how different alien species thought and behaved. She was young, energetic, and extremely interested in what Taeyang was doing. This is remarkable, she told him, after observing one of his story sessions. Do you understand what you're accomplishing here? I'm just reading books to children, Taeyang said. You're triggering cognitive development that shouldn't be happening, Mireille said, her eyes bright with excitement. Rilthi younglings don't develop abstract imagination until they're much older, almost adults. But these cubs are imagining complex scenarios, creating mental images, even predicting narrative outcomes. You're activating parts of their brains that should be dormant. Is that dangerous? Taeyang asked, worried. I don't think so. But it's unprecedented. And it's not just the Rilthi. The Kes younglings are developing story prediction abilities their species doesn't normally have. The Brel are processing emotional narratives in ways their psychologists have never documented. She pulled out her data pad and showed him brain scans. Look at this. This is a normal Rilthi cub brain during educational activities. And this is a brain scan from yesterday's story session. See the difference? Taeyang looked at the colorful images but didn't really understand them. What does it mean? It means human storytelling isn't just entertainment for these younglings. It's actually changing how they think. Mirai sat back, looking thoughtful. Humans evolved, telling stories. It's how your species teaches, bonds, and understands the world. But most other species didn't evolve that way. They share memories directly, or they have hive knowledge, or they learn through experience alone. The kind of imagination required for storytelling is unique to humans and a few other species, but the younglings can imagine the stories. Taeyang pointed out. Yes, because you're teaching them how. You're exercising mental muscles they didn't know they had. But it's also going to cause problems. She was right. The problem started small. A morphin parent came to one of Taeyang's sessions and pulled their youngling out in the middle of a story. This is making them unpredictable. The parent said stiffly. They ask too many questions now. It's not appropriate. A few days later, Taeyang received a formal complaint from a Zentari diplomat. The complaint stated that the diplomat's offspring had become disturbingly imaginative and was questioning established facts. They're worried, Hana explained when Taeyang showed her the complaint. These younglings are changing, and their parents don't understand it. Change is scary, but other parents were thrilled. Ambassador Cathella sent Taeyang a message praising his work. A Kes family gave him a traditional gift of woven feathers. Several species representatives asked if he would be willing to visit their home worlds to share his storytelling techniques. The station split into two camps. Those who saw the storytelling as beneficial, even revolutionary, and those who saw it as dangerous interference with natural development. Commander Choi called Taeyang to his office again. This time, his expression was serious. "We have a situation," he said. "The Coalition Science Directorate has taken an interest in your activities. They're considering classifying human narrative arts as a restricted cultural export." "What does that mean?" Taeyang asked. "It means they might forbid you from continuing. They might restrict all humans from sharing stories with alien species. They're worried about cultural contamination." Taeyang felt something cold in his stomach. "But I'm just reading books to children." "You're changing those children," Commander Choi said. "That's powerful. And power makes people nervous." He sighed. "There's going to be a diplomatic reception next week. The Science Directorate representatives will be there. You should attend. Let them see you're just a normal person doing something harmless." The reception was formal and uncomfortable. Taeyang wore his best diplomatic clothes and tried to blend into the background. He made small talk with various officials, all of whom seemed to have opinions about his story sessions. He was talking with a Brel scientist when he heard a commotion near the entrance. Younglings' voices, high and determined. Security, trying to gently redirect them. Taeyang excused himself and went to see what was happening. At least 20 younglings had gathered outside the reception hall. Rilthi cubs, Kes younglings, Brel children, and more. They carried signs made from station materials, with messages written in multiple languages. "Stories are for everyone," one sign read. "Don't take away our imagination." Read another. "We demand the human's right to tell stories." Vra was at the front, her fur bristling with determination. When she saw Taeyang, she called out, "We won't let them stop you." The other younglings joined in, making a chorus of different sounds that somehow all carried the same message. They were protesting. Alien children from 6 different species had organized a protest to defend his story sessions. The reception hall had gone quiet. Every official, diplomat, and scientist was now watching the scene at the entrance. Some looked disapproving. Others looked surprised. A few seemed amused. Ambassador Cathella stepped forward. She looked at the younglings, then at the assembled officials. "My friends," she said in her deep, resonant voice, "perhaps we should listen to those who are most affected by this decision." She gestured for the younglings to enter. Security looked uncertain, but stepped aside. The younglings filed into the reception hall, still holding their signs, and Taeyang felt his throat tighten with emotion. A Morphin official spoke up. "This is inappropriate. Younglings do not make policy decisions." "No," Ambassador Cathella agreed. "But perhaps they should have a voice in matters that concern them directly." She looked at Vra. "Would you like to speak, young one?" Vra stepped forward, and despite her small size, she held herself with confidence. "Before the human came, I didn't know about tigers or dried persimmons or brave children who climb to the sky. Now, I know about hundreds of things. I can imagine places I've never been, and people I've never met. When I close my eyes, I can see whole worlds." She looked around at all the adults watching her. "Why would you want to take that away from us?" A Kes youngling spoke next, their voice high and chirping. "Stories make us think. They make us wonder. They make us want to know more about everything." One by one, several younglings spoke. They talked about how stories made them feel. how they loved imagining different possibilities, how they had started creating their own stories about their own worlds and cultures. The officials listened. Some looked uncomfortable, others looked thoughtful. The Science Directorate representatives whispered among themselves. When the younglings finished, the hall was silent for a long moment. Then a Zentari official spoke. "These younglings are more articulate and thoughtful than any I have encountered. If this is the result of human storytelling, perhaps we should reconsider our concerns." But a Morphin representative disagreed. "Or perhaps it proves our point. These younglings are changing in ways their species never intended. Is that not concerning?" The debate that followed was intense. Taeyang stood to the side, watching species representatives argue about imagination, tradition, change, and the future. The younglings sat in a group, holding hands and paws and tendrils, united in their cause. Finally, Commander Choi stepped forward. "The Coalition Council will vote on this matter," he announced. "A formal hearing will be scheduled. Until then, the story sessions will continue under observation." It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a defeat either. As the reception broke up, the younglings surrounded Taeyang. "We won't let them stop you," Vra said again. "We'll keep fighting." Taeyang looked at their determined faces and realized something. He hadn't just been teaching them about stories. He had been teaching them to stand up for what they believed in, to imagine a different future and fight for it. "Thank you," he said quietly. "All of you. You're very brave." That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in his bunk, thinking about everything that had happened. He had just wanted to help some scared cubs during a power outage. Now there were political debates and protests and votes that would affect the entire coalition. Sometimes, he thought, the smallest actions have the biggest consequences. The news spread across the coalition faster than anyone expected. Within a week, every major news network was running stories about the human who had started a children's revolution. Reporters showed up at the station, wanting to interview Taeyang. Some praised him as a cultural pioneer. Others called him a dangerous influence on alien youth. More importantly, other humans across coalition space started reporting similar experiences. A human teacher on a science station mentioned that her alien students had asked her to tell stories like the one they heard about. A human merchant said younglings followed her around a trade post, begging for tales. A human engineer found himself surrounded by curious young aliens who wanted to hear about Earth legends. It wasn't just Taeyang anymore. It was happening everywhere humans and alien younglings came into contact. The desire for stories seemed to cross all species boundaries. Taeyang watched the news coverage with growing anxiety. He had never wanted to be the center of attention. He just wanted to help some kids. Now his face was known across dozens of star systems, and he was somehow responsible for a galaxy-wide cultural incident. "You okay?" Hana asked, finding him in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. "I don't know," he admitted. "This is all too much. I'm not a revolutionary or a cultural ambassador. I'm just someone who reads bedtime stories." "Those bedtime stories changed everything," Hana said gently. "You can't take that back now." The coalition convened an emergency cultural summit. Representatives from 40 different species gathered to discuss what they were calling the narrative phenomenon. Taeyang was required to attend as the primary witness. The summit was held on a neutral diplomatic station, larger and more formal than the one where Taeyang lived. He felt out of place among the high-ranking officials and important scientists. Dr. Mireille Song attended as well, bringing her research data. Commander Choi came as the station's representative. The debates were long and complex. Taeyang sat through hours of discussion about cognitive development, cultural preservation, and evolutionary psychology. Much of it went over his head, but he understood the basic positions. The conservative faction, led by the Morphin delegation, argued that human storytelling represented unnatural interference with species development. They believed each species should evolve at its own pace without outside influence. The changes in younglings were concerning and potentially harmful. The progressive faction, including Ambassador Cathella and the Rilthi delegation, argued that exposure to new ideas had always been part of coalition culture. They saw the cognitive development in younglings as beneficial and exciting. Why shouldn't species learn from each other? A middle group wanted more research before making any decisions. They weren't opposed to storytelling, but wanted to understand the long-term effects first. During a break, Taeyang found himself alone in a corridor, trying to calm his nerves. A Morphin official approached him. The being was tall and crystalline, with a body that refracted light in strange patterns. "You seem like a reasonable person," the official said. "Do you not see the danger in what you've done?" "I just told some stories," Taeyang said. "You changed those younglings. You made them different from what they should be. Is that not a violation of their natural development?" Taeyang thought about that. "With respect, I don't think I changed them. I think I just showed them something they already had inside. The ability to imagine, to wonder, to create. Every species we've studied has some form of creativity. I just gave them a new way to express it." The official was silent for a moment. "But now, they question things. They imagine alternatives to reality. This makes them harder to guide, harder to teach in traditional ways." "Is that bad?" Taeyang asked. "It is. Unsettling," the official admitted before walking away. Dr. Mireille presented her research on the second day of the summit. She had spent weeks studying brain scans, behavioral patterns, and developmental markers in the younglings who attended Taeyang's story sessions. "What we're seeing is unprecedented," she told the assembled officials. "But it's not unnatural. Human brains developed strong imagination capabilities because humans needed them to survive. As social creatures who hunted cooperatively, humans had to imagine what others were thinking and feeling. They had to predict behavior, plan for future events, and communicate complex ideas. Stories were how they did all of that." She displayed a complex chart. "Most coalition species evolved differently. Many have some form of collective consciousness or hive memory. They don't need individual imagination, the same way humans do. But the capacity for imagination exists in all of them. It's just dormant, undeveloped. Human storytelling is activating those dormant pathways." A Zentari scientist raised a question. "But is this activation beneficial or harmful? Are we forcing these younglings to develop capabilities their species doesn't need?" "That's the interesting part," Mireille said. "My research shows that the younglings aren't just developing imagination, they're developing empathy, creativity, and problem-solving skills. They're better at understanding different perspectives and dealing with novel situations. These are valuable capabilities for any species." She showed video recordings of younglings working together on projects, creating collaborative stories that mixed elements from all their different cultures. They're not becoming more human. They're becoming more themselves, but with expanded capabilities. The debates continued for 3 more days. Taeyang testified on the 4th day. Speaking about his experiences, he kept it simple, describing how the younglings reacted to different types of stories, how they engaged with the narratives, how they started creating their own. "I don't think stories are about humans teaching aliens," he said. "Stories are about understanding that others have different inner worlds. Every species has the capacity for narrative. Humans just practiced it more, because we needed it to survive." During a particularly heated discussion, something unexpected happened. A group of alien younglings appeared on the video screens. They had recorded a message from their various homeworlds and stations across the coalition. One by one, younglings from dozens of species spoke about what stories meant to them. A young Rilthi on the homeworld talked about the traditional myths of their people that no one had told in generations, now being rediscovered because storytelling was becoming popular again. A Kes youngling demonstrated a flight dance narrative they had created, combining their species' movement language with story structure. A group of Brel children sang a collaborative song story they had composed together. The message was clear. This wasn't about humans imposing their culture on others. It was about younglings finding new ways to express their own cultures. Ambassador Cathella stood and addressed the summit. My friends, I have watched these younglings carefully. Yes, they are changing, but they are not becoming less Rilthi, or less Kess, or less Brel. They are becoming more creative versions of themselves. They are finding new ways to honor their own traditions and histories. The human did not bring storytelling to the galaxy. He reminded us that we all have stories to tell. The vote was scheduled for the following day. Taeyang barely slept that night. Hana tried to reassure him, but he couldn't shake his anxiety. What if they voted to ban human storytelling? What if all those younglings lost something they had come to love? The morning of the vote, Taeyang sat in the observation gallery with other witnesses and press representatives. The Coalition Council chamber was enormous, filled with representatives from member species. The vote would decide the Narrative Arts Accord, a formal document that would either protect human storytelling as a cultural practice or severely restrict it. One by one, species representatives voted. Some voted yes immediately. Others voted no. Many abstained, wanting more time to study the issue. The vote was close. Too close to call. Finally, the last vote was cast. The mediator calculated the results. Taeyang held his breath. The Narrative Arts Accord is approved, the mediator announced. Human storytelling is recognized as a protected cultural practice within Coalition space. Relief flooded through Taeyang. But the mediator wasn't finished. Additionally, the Council approves funding for the Galactic Storytelling Initiative, a program to study and develop narrative traditions in all member species. The chamber erupted in discussion. This was more than anyone expected. Not just permission for humans to tell stories, but active support for all species to develop their own storytelling traditions. Ambassador Cathella found Taeyang after the session. This is a good outcome, she said. Better than we hoped for. I still can't believe this happened, Taeyang said. All of this from a bedtime story during a power outage. The best changes often start with small moments, the ambassador said wisely. You showed kindness to frightened cubs. That kindness rippled outward and touched an entire galaxy. Never underestimate the power of small kindnesses. Over the following weeks, the reality of the accord began to take shape. Taeyang was offered a position as Director of Cross-Species Narrative Exchange. He would work with teams across the coalition to develop storytelling programs for different species. He accepted, but only on one condition. No matter how important his new job became, he would still read to the younglings every evening. That was where it started. And that was what mattered most. Hana agreed to be his co-director, focusing on the linguistic aspects of storytelling across different species. Commander Choi admitted, somewhat reluctantly, that he had started reading human novels in his spare time and found them tactically interesting. Dr. Mireille established the first xenopsychology program focused on imagination and creativity. She would study how different species could develop their own forms of narrative art while respecting their unique neural structures and cultural contexts. The galaxy was changing, one story at a time. And it had all started with 3 scared cubs in the dark and a human who knew how to calm them with words. 6 months after the Narrative Arts Accord passed, the galaxy looked different. Not in obvious ways, but in small, important changes that rippled through everyday life. On stations and planets across Coalition space, story hours became common. Some were led by humans, but increasingly, members of other species took up the practice. A Rilthi elder on the homeworld began sharing traditional myths that had been forgotten for generations. Kess parents developed flight dance narratives that combined movement with story. Brel musicians created song stories that could last for hours. Each species was finding its own way to tell stories, drawing on their unique strengths and cultural traditions. Humans hadn't imposed their storytelling style on the galaxy. They had simply reminded everyone that stories mattered. Taeyang's life had changed dramatically. His new position kept him busy, traveling to different stations and worlds, consulting with alien educators and cultural specialists. But every evening that he was home at the embassy station, he kept his promise. At 7 o'clock, he sat in the community center and read to the younglings. They were reading a human epic fantasy series now, full of magic and dragons and chosen heroes. The younglings had strong opinions about everything. They argued about character motivations. They predicted plot twists. They groaned when Taeyang stopped at exciting cliffhangers. This author is cruel. Vra complained one evening when Taeyang closed the book after a particularly tense chapter, making us wait to know what happens. That's part of the fun, Taeyang said, smiling. The anticipation makes the next part even better. Human fun is torture, a Kess youngling chirped. But they were already discussing theories about what would happen next. Tonight was special, though. Tonight was the first meeting of what the younglings were calling the Story Circle. They had invited Taeyang to attend as a guest. The Story Circle met in a larger room in the cultural center. When Taeyang arrived, he found about 30 younglings from a dozen species, all sitting in a rough circle. They had organized this themselves, without adult help. Vra stood in the center, looking nervous but determined. She was older now, almost ready to begin her adult training. What followed amazed him. The younglings had created a collaborative story, with each species contributing parts based on their strengths. The Rilthy cubs narrated sections about brave heroes and great adventures. The Kess younglings acted out flying scenes with their natural grace. The Brel sang emotional passages. Other species added their own unique elements. The story itself was a mixture of elements from different cultures. It had a hero from Rilthy mythology, a magical artifact from Kess legend, and a quest structure that felt human, but had been adapted to include alien perspectives. It was messy and sometimes contradictory, but it was also beautiful and entirely original. When they finished, all the younglings looked at Taeyang expectantly. "What do you think?" Vra asked. "I think it's wonderful," Taeyang said honestly. "You've created something that could only exist here, in the coalition, with all of you working together. That's not a human story, or a Rilthy story, or a Kess story. That's your story." The younglings made happy sounds, different for each species but all clearly pleased. They began discussing what to work on next, already planning their next collaborative project. As Taeyang watched them, Hana appeared beside him. "Remember when you were just trying to calm 3 scared cubs?" she said softly. "That feels like a lifetime ago," Taeyang said. "You should see what's happening on other stations," Hana told him. "There's a Zentari elder on Station Primus who started recording their species' history as narrative instead of pure data. They say it helps younglings remember better. A Morphin community has started something they call crystal stories, where they create visual narratives in their crystalline structures. Even species that oppose the Accord are finding their own ways to embrace storytelling." "Is it everything we hoped for?" Taeyang asked. "It's better," Hana said, "because it's not just about humans sharing stories anymore. It's about everyone discovering the stories they already had inside them." Later that week, Taeyang received an unexpected visitor. The Morphin official, who had questioned him during the summit, requested a private meeting. Taeyang agreed. Curious and a little nervous, the official arrived at his office, their crystalline form refracting the light in the same strange patterns. "I came to apologize," the official said without preamble. "I was wrong about you and about storytelling." "What changed your mind?" Taeyang asked. "My offspring," the official said. They attended one of the new Morphin story sessions. For the first time, they showed interest in our ancient history. They asked questions about their ancestors, about the old ways that we had stopped teaching, because younglings found them boring. The stories made them care. The official paused. "You did not destroy our culture. You helped us find new ways to preserve it." After the official left, Taeyang sat in his office for a long time, thinking about the conversation. This was what it had all been about. Not replacing anyone's culture, but helping cultures find new ways to express themselves. That evening, Taeyang walked to the community center for the regular story hour. The halls were busy with families heading home after work and school. Several younglings waved to him as he passed. An adult Kess bowed slightly in greeting. A Brel family invited him to their home for dinner next week. He was part of the community now. Truly, part of it. Not just the human cultural attaché, but Taeyang, the person who read stories and listened to younglings and helped them discover their imaginations. The community center was full as usual. The Rilthi cubs had claimed their favorite spots in the front. Other younglings filled in around them. A rainbow of different species all settling in comfortably. Some brought cushions from home. Others had snacks their parents had packed. Taeyang sat in his chair and picked up the book. Before he could start reading, Vra raised her paw. "Taeyang," she asked, "can I ask you something first?" "Of course," he said. When humans first went to space, were they scared? The question caught him off guard. "Yes," he said after a moment. "Very scared. Space is dangerous and unknown." But they went anyway. "Why?" a Kess youngling asked. If they were scared, why did they go? Taeyang thought about how to answer. Because humans can imagine what might be out there. They dreamed about other worlds and other peoples. They told stories about space travel for hundreds of years before they could actually do it. Those stories made them brave enough to try. "Tell us that story," Vra said, settling in more comfortably. "Tell us about humans who looked at the stars and decided to visit them." Taeyang set aside the fantasy novel. "Okay," he said. "This is a true story about real humans who lived a long time ago." He told them about the first human space missions, about brave people who climbed into primitive rockets, knowing they might not come back, about the first human to orbit Earth, the first to walk on the moon, the first to travel beyond their solar system. He told them about failures and successes, about fear and courage, about humanity's long journey to the stars. The younglings listened with complete attention. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then a Brel youngling said softly, "My people have stories like that too. About the first Brel, who swam to the deep places of our ocean, where no one had gone before." "Mine too," Akes said. "About the first of us who flew above the cloud layer." One by one, younglings began sharing their people's stories of exploration and courage. Each species had them. Each culture had told themselves stories about brave individuals who went into the unknown. Taeyang listened and realized something important. Humans weren't special because they told stories. Every species told stories. Humans had just made it a central part of their culture and development. But the capacity for narrative, for imagination, for dreaming about what could be, that was universal. As the session ended and younglings began leaving with their parents, Vra lingered behind. She was getting too old for story hour, really, almost ready to start her adult life. But she kept coming anyway. "You know what I want to be?" she asked Taeyang. "What?" "A story keeper for my people. Someone who collects our old tales and finds new ways to share them. Someone who helps Rilthi cubs discover their imagination, the way you helped me." She looked up at him with those large, expressive eyes. "Is that a good thing to be?" That's a wonderful thing to be," Taeyang said, his voice thick with emotion. "The galaxy needs more story keepers." After everyone left, Taeyang stayed in the community center for a while, thinking about everything that had happened. He remembered that night, 6 months ago, or was it 7 now, when he had been trapped in the dark with 3 terrified cubs. He had told them a simple folktale about a tiger and a dried persimmon, just trying to help them feel safe. From that small moment, all of this had grown. Story hours across the galaxy, new narrative traditions developing in dozens of species, younglings discovering their creativity, cultures finding new ways to preserve their histories, and every evening, here in this room, children from different worlds sat together and listened to stories. They imagined together. They dreamed together. They became friends across species boundaries that used to seem impossible to cross. Hana found him there, sitting in the quiet room. "Ready to go home?" she asked. "Yeah," Taeyang said, standing up. "Just thinking about how strange life is. 6 months ago, I was nobody special. Just a low-level cultural attaché, doing paperwork. You're still nobody special," Hana teased gently. "You're just a person who reads bedtime stories to children. You just happen to do it really well." 10. They walked out together, turning off the lights. Behind them, the community center stood quiet, waiting for tomorrow's stories. Outside, the station's artificial night cycle had begun. The lights were dimmed to simulate evening. Through the observation windows, real stars shone in the darkness of space. Taeyang looked at those stars and thought about all the worlds out there. All the species, all the cultures, all the stories waiting to be told and shared and discovered. The galaxy was so much bigger than he had ever imagined when he first arrived at this station. But it was also smaller, more connected. Because stories had a way of bringing people together. They created bridges between minds that were very different, but could still understand each other through narrative and imagination. "Tomorrow," Hana said, "you have a call with the Zentari Education Ministry. They want to establish a formal storytelling curriculum." "Tomorrow," Taeyang agreed. "But tonight, I just want to think about 3 scared cubs who needed a story, and how sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything." They walked down the corridor together, 2 humans among dozens of species. All of them sharing this space, learning from each other, growing together. Behind them, in the community center, the books waited on their shelves. Human books, Rilthi scrolls, Kess recordings, Brel songs, stories from 100 worlds, ready to be shared. And in the morning, younglings would come again, eager to hear what happened next. Because that was the magic of stories. There was always a next chapter, always another tale to tell, always new worlds to imagine. The galaxy had learned something from humanity. Not technology, or weapons, or political systems. Something simpler and more powerful. The galaxy had learned to dream together. And that, Taeyang thought as he reached his quarters, was the best story of all.